Coming up tonight, third time's the charm as we give the Anthem a third try and finally set sail for hopefully a good sailing. Summer makes its grand arrival just in time, and we check out the 270 experience. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day one of the cruise view for May 3rd, 2018. We are once again back on board the Anthem of the Seas. And yes, I did say May, not December, as I had mentioned in that last series. While we did attempt our first sailing of the Anthem back in April 2017, of course had to cut that short. We're supposed to have our second attempt in December 2017, but unfortunately had to cancel that for more family medical issues. But May 3rd, 2018, we are back on board the Anthem of the Seas finally for the third attempt at this ship. And while we did cancel that one in December, which was a 12-night identical to April, they only had, I believe, 2 more sailings, neither of which worked at the 12-night length. So this is only a 9-night sailing, but 9 nights combined with 3 nights from last year will give us that complete 12 nights, so we will finally get through the 12 nights of Anthem of the Seas. And as I mentioned in the last video, we will be holding a burial at sea for my father during the sailing as well, so that'll be coming up possibly day number 4. We're still waiting on some confirmation from the ship to figure out exactly what day and time that will happen for sure. This is, as I mentioned, not the 12-night sailing, this is the 9-night sailing of the Anthem of the Seas, which is a Bermuda and Caribbean sailing rather than the 12-night Southern Caribbean, so that means a slightly different itinerary. We of course start out in Cape Liberty again, but only have 1 sea day to kick things off before arriving in Kings Wharf, Bermuda for a somewhat rare single-day stop to the island, and then another single sea day as we head south to arrive in Philipsburg, St. Martin, and then spend a morning in San Juan, Puerto Rico the following day, followed by a full relaxing day in Labadee, Haiti, Royal Caribbean's private island, before spending 2 sea days heading back up north to Cape Liberty, New Jersey for a May 12th departure. So as I mentioned, today of course, first day, meant it was the embarkation day in Cape Liberty. Somewhere we of course sailed on the Quantum of the Seas twice, once as a turnaround day and once as an actual embarkation, and of course we did board the Anthem of the Seas last year. So we saw what things were like, what changed, and compared to last year, not a whole lot has changed. It really was, for the most part, the same process they used last year, a more improved one than Quantum, but the same as we saw in Anthem last year. There was a slight change to things. We got an email, I believe 2 days ago, announcing that there was going to be some Coast Guard inspections of the ship, and as a result, the embarkation process would actually be delayed. So they originally listed in that email that the arrival time should be between 12 and 3 p.m. rather than arriving as early as 10:30. We delayed slightly, got here about 11 o'clock, and when we arrived, port was pretty empty. There were some cars, not too many people around, but when we got into the terminal, it was fairly empty as well, no lines anywhere, really got right through there, and they were already actually boarding the ship. So even though they had said 12, by 11 they already were boarding. And that, of course, as I mentioned, was a very smooth process, only about 15 minutes from curb to being on the ship again, just like it was last year. And part of that could have been a result of the fact that they did tell people to show up later, and I'm sure many people took that, but when I was looking online, most people seem to be sticking to their original arrival time of earlier in the day. Later, as I was up on the top deck looking out of the port, you could see there was a very long line of cars all the way down the road out of sight. So there were a lot of people coming in later, but when you looked at the actual area and directly in front of the port, there were very few cars actually unloading. So it seemed like there was a bottleneck getting in later, not necessarily in the terminal, but actually just then unloading the cars and getting the luggage handled. Not sure if that was related to the Coast Guard inspection at all or not. I don't believe so. But beyond that, it was a very smooth and efficient process to get on board the ship, just as we saw a year ago. And even with that Coast Guard inspection, the rooms were still ready at 1 p.m. as they typically are. In the terminal they were saying 1:30 maybe, but 1 o'clock the announcement came out at almost the exact minute stating that all cabins were available, and they were as expected. So our location today, as I mentioned, it was Cape Liberty, New Jersey, of course in Bayonne, and it was the departure day, so we had a 4 o'clock departure from the terminal. We actually left a little bit earlier. There was a 3:30 muster drill, and when that was letting out, we were already starting to move away from the dock, so we left a little bit earlier than 4. But about 4:45 we got to the Verrazano Bridge, sailed right under there, cleared it as we always do. And at 5:30, the pilot finally departed the ship. Just like we saw last year, there was actually a pilot ship along with the pilot boat that helped to handle that process. And as the pilot boat left, while we did not hear the Anthem's horn the entire day, the pilot boat did sound its horn several times as it departed. And moving on to the weather, we of course had a very long winter that just keeps dragging on out. Seems like every time it's over we get a little more snow coming in, but luckily summer did finally arrive today with the warmest day of the year so far coming on this day. And of course to get those high temperatures meant that we had very sunny, beautiful conditions out there when walking around on the top deck. The compass had a listed high of 70 degrees. Not exactly sure where that number came from because the forecast has been 84 to 86 degrees for the past about week or possibly even 10 days. And this afternoon, the actual high, according to the TVs, was a 90-degree temperature. Might have gotten even higher than that at some points later in the day, but we did at least get into the 90s, a number we had not reached so far this year. So it was the warmest day of the year to get this cruise started. And of course, warm weather, beautiful sunny skies and conditions made for a perfect day in port. And unfortunately when we did depart, we did see a little change in the conditions. It got a bit cool and windy, but nothing too out of control for the departure. Once we were out at sea, and tonight according to the captain we're supposed to have about 10-foot seas, and right now when I go outside it is raining a bit, so the conditions have gotten a bit worse now that we're at sea, and there's a lot of movement in the ship. You might be able to hear it in the video as well because it is pretty audible in some areas of the ship like this. But tonight, before those conditions moved in, when the clouds were just starting to arrive, we did get a bit of a sunset, some beautiful colors. Got to watch part of it right from 270, so we did at least get a little sunset in before those rain clouds moved in this evening. So for our compass, the daily activities for our first day back on board the Anthem of the Seas is sailing. Of course, a bit of deja vu as the last sailing. Day 1 was pretty identical to what went on today. So of course I boarded, went to my favorite place, 270, got lunch at the 270 cafe. Once again, you really cannot beat that when you board any cruise, and I did not even go up to the Windjammer, so I have no idea how crowded it was today. But the ship in general was pretty empty, but 270 was completely empty, so it's always a good place to go. People really overlook it, just assume the Windjammer, the big buffets are the place to go, and they really are not if you want to avoid those crowds, especially if you're towing around luggage because the rooms aren't ready when you board. As a side benefit of the 270, they also moved the box office location over to 270, which made that process simpler. Since we did rebook this cruise very late after the final payment, I was able to make all of our show reservations, but I was not able to get our iFly or North Star reservations made. Both of those were completely booked up by the time that I had access to the cruise planner. So I did have to use the box office to take care of those. I attempted to do it on Royal IQ right when I got on board. Neither one of those were available to book. It seemed like going to the box office was the only way to do it, but at least it was right in 270 where I already was, so it wasn't too big of a deal to take care of. And along with that, going around the ship, usually there's North Star available to do on the first day with no reservations, and iFly is running. There's usually a couple things going on, but today was actually a pretty dead day on the ship. I have a feeling it was related to the Coast Guard inspections, but all day they did not run North Star, Flow Rider, or iFly, the three activities that really bring some life to the top deck of the ship and show off the ship to the new passengers. All three of those items were completely shut down. The only activity that really seemed to be operating this afternoon was the bumper cars. Those were running and surprisingly were empty, typically running with about 3/4 of the cars being used, something that you don't normally see. Even on boarding day, that is usually one of those crowded items. But it was the only activity going on. The rest of it, as I mentioned, was not operating. Once we were out at sea about 5:15, I didn't see it, but from the TV camera, you could see that North Star was starting to run. I don't know if those were reservations or just first come, first show, but at least tonight that did get a little bit of action in. So with none of that stuff running, that opened up a bit more time. We did have a few things to take care of, like that box office, of course checking our dining room table, and some other issues with the sailing to get resolved. But we did have plenty of time to take in the sights of New York from over here in Bayonne. And then at 3:30, we did have our muster drill. Our cabin this time is in the back, somewhere we usually aren't. But with this late booking date, I did opt to do a guarantee cabin, which they did assign about 48 hours later. It was located in the back on deck number 11. Nice location, a little bit far from the elevators, as all the cabins in the aft of the ship tend to feel. But it was a decent cabin with a great view out for the ship. And from that location, that meant that our muster station was not in the Royal Theater this time. It was in 270. So we headed down there for our muster drill. It was slightly different again. We've been seeing a lot of evolution in this. Royal Caribbean really simplifying things. Once again, they have simplified it farther. This time they had an entertaining video, kind of in line with what the airlines are doing for their safety videos, adding a bit of humor, a bit of Hollywood style, and making them a little more entertaining to hopefully get people to pay attention to them. And while not being explicitly told all the details, hopefully picking up on what really matters by at least paying attention. And that did exclude a few things. There was no demonstration of the actual life vest like there have been in the past ones. But in the case of a real emergency, most people likely didn't pay attention to the video and would need that demonstration again, so it probably isn't bad that they skipped it here. But overall, it seemed like a lot more people did pay attention. It seemed like it was a lot quieter and seemed to make a good impact. So it'll be interesting to see in the future if this continues, if they have to go back, or if we see some other videos produced, because I'm sure this is only the first attempt at this. And then, as I mentioned, while in the muster drill, before we were even dismissed, while the captain was giving his speech, we already were leaving the dock and heading out to sea. So as soon as that ended, I had to get up to the top deck to watch our departure. And of course, following the departure, 4 o'clock, about an hour and a half to get through that when you're leaving from Bayonne, was just in time for dinner. So with this one, as I mentioned, we did have a late booking. We, of course, had some activities not available, but we also got my time dining because the early dining that we usually go for was completely filled. We waitlisted for it, and about 2 weeks ago I got a random email with some confirmation details, nothing explicit. And about 10 days ago I went into the cruise planner and noticed that while I had our My Time Dining bookings made for every single day of the sailing at 5:30, the traditional time, suddenly 1 out of the 3 guests in our cabin were missing from them all. So I had to contact Royal Caribbean. We worked through some things, and eventually over the weekend they just got back to me and found that they had an IT issue and they actually moved one of the passengers up to early because the wait list came through, but the other two were left at my time. So they went through some things, took care of it, and tonight we had an absolutely beautiful table. Not only were we all in early dining as we had hoped for, all of our requests came through. We had a beautiful private table right at the windows in the Grand, only I think 3 tables over from where we actually were a year ago. So an absolutely beautiful location. So even with some of those issues, Royal Caribbean took care of them all, and we have all of our requests taken care of at this last moment. So overall, the menu has not changed much, but they did change the format. They are no longer explicitly calling out the classics and the specials. Each day's menu features the starters, the entrees, and the desserts. 1 page, single section for each one of those. Not a big fan of this. You really can't tell what is exclusive to that day that you should order, what's going to be available other days. But it seemed to overall work. Things were much more efficient, things flowed much smoother getting the dessert right away. It might have made things a little more rushed for some people's taste, but it did seem to make things flow well, and if you did not want to rush so much, you could ask to delay ordering. And even with a new look to the menu, as I mentioned, it was the exact same menu as last year, which meant I got the exact same items. I started out with my traditional French onion soup, which was absolutely delicious. Best one I've had on a ship. I always mention that this is a great way to judge different ships. This one, tons of cheese and tons of bread in it. It was delicious, the best one I've seen on the ships. And I followed that up with the baked polenta and feta cheese. This one, it was good, it tasted good, but it was not quite as good as last year's. They were definitely a little bit better last year. And for dessert, I got a peach and blueberry cobbler, which was very different than the one that I had last year. Last year's was very clear peach and blueberries and had a little more of an orange look. This year's was almost like a custard or jello to it, and it was all a bright purple, so it was a very different look. It still tasted good, but it was definitely a different kind of dish than what we had a year ago. And after that, we then headed to 270 because according to Royal IQ, there were supposed to be robo shows. Those were supposed to be at 7:30, did not happen. Royal IQ also said there was supposed to be showing of the concert Vistoramas at 9:30, which also were not accurate. What they didn't show in Royal IQ though was that 270 experience was supposed to happen. So as we waited for the robo shows and many other people were also waiting, nothing happened. We left, and as we're walking out, I just happened to notice that there was a sign for 270 experience, something I explicitly noticed was missing from the Royal IQ when I was planning out our evening. So that of course made me look back at the paper and found that they did not match. So once again, Royal IQ's compass is not in line with the paper, and if you used it, you ended up missing out on things. Hopefully this will be resolved with the new app. Royal Caribbean, of course, is a new app available on Symphony of the Seas and several other new ships. It is a replacement for Royal IQ, but Royal IQ remains on ships that already had it. Hopefully the compass will be a bit more accurate. It's hard to say whether it will be or not, as inaccurate compasses seem to be more of a data issue than an app issue. But at least we can hope that something will happen, because as of right now, the Royal IQ app is still not useful as a replacement to the paper. You really still have to carry that paper around, or you're going to miss things, or you'll be waiting for things that aren't happening because they don't actually show on the schedule for that day, even if IQ says it is. So after we left 270, then we of course went to the Royal Theatre for our evening show, our real evening show, the 8:30 Welcome Aboard show starring comedian Steve White, another comedian that we have not seen before, and very different comedian than anyone that we've seen before. We've always seen a variety of comedians, different people, different tastes, I always say, but they've often been a little older. This one was a more younger approach to comedy. It was a very natural, very interactive, a lot of joking with the audience and making jokes about the audience and about cruising and Anthem in general. It was a very cruise and sailing specific comedy show compared to some of the past ones we've seen that were very set in stone kind of show that they would go through a standard routine. This one was very light, and directed directly to this sailing.
Are you sparing the children? Is that what's going on right now? Kids, get out of here! Get to your muster stations! I'm not gonna curse. Where you going? I love when people leave early. We gotta get the car. We sail at the Passaic Mall. We have to.
In addition to comedian Steve White, who will be returning tomorrow night for an adult-only show, we of course got to meet our cruise director, Clodagh O'Connor, who we'll be talking to later in this sailing. And of course, she's been with the company for probably about 20 years, so she is nothing new to this industry. She's been doing it a long time. And for me, at least, this is the first female cruise director I've ever had, so I've kind of been interested in seeing how that dynamic would be. And so far, it's been like any other cruise director, except I think she's actually a little bit more humorous than many of the other cruise directors. She seems a little more open to joking about areas that normal cruise directors kind of hold themselves back to. And so far, she seems like a hit with everyone on board.
Check, is there any of our cruisers on board from Ireland? Okay. We're not cruising yet, obviously. And even if we do have some Irish people on board, to be fair, there is a lot of obstacles to get into the theatre. You've probably seen all the bars along the way, and you know the chances of them getting into the theatre are very slim. There's even a big pub there that stops a lot of them pretty much at embarkation until debark, but that's okay.
So we not only got to see her in the Welcome Aboard show, immediately following that at 9:30, as I mentioned, headed over to 270 for the 270 Tonight show. And that was, of course, hosted by Chloe, and she did that similar to Drew. Got up in a tube in the center of 270 and kind of hosted the whole thing, but it was a different setup of events because, as I mentioned, we are rocking a bit. That meant they could not do the aerialist, they did not have any entertainers, it was purely the venue, but she brought in Jack from up in the control booth and actually had him talking in it and explaining some things and doing some friendly banter to add a little extra humor and entertainment value to it.
Keep watching. Who survives? Who survives? There! It's a bird, it's a plane, it's a dolphin, it's a swan. All of that money, you could at least think that Bruce Willis would appear at the end, wouldn't you? I mean, come on. We don't ask for much, girls. Just a little bit of Bruce at the end.
Am I not good enough, Chloe?
No. So, I just realised we're rocking a little bit, Jack. So obviously,
it is actually.
Yeah. If we go over a pothole, I'm gonna land on some lucky man down there. Yeah.
Very lucky.
Which one will I pick? Oh, I don't know. Decisions.
But the main gist of the show was, of course, 270 and the technology involved, which included a few demonstrations. First two we, of course, see every single time, and that was to show the John Williams Vistarama, as well as the most overplayed robo show of them all, Dance in a Box, the absolute original robo show that premiered with the Quantum of the Seas 4 years ago. Well, last year I, of course, mentioned that we saw it again, and that it was much tighter. This one was very loose. I've seen that show more times than I can even count, and I think this was possibly the worst I've seen that show. I don't know if it was the rocking of the ship, if they had to put a little more leeway in it, but there was a lot of moments where the video just was not synced with the movements. When they did go to start it, the robots actually locked up a little bit, so maybe the reset process did not go as smoothly as it should have, but it was certainly not as tightly done as it has been the past couple times I've seen, especially last sailing where it was absolutely beautiful to see. But in addition to that technical difficulty, they also had a difficulty with the Vistarama, where the video played, but the music was playing a previous Vistarama they played, so they had to, of course, pause that and restart that. So they actually had two different technical issues. And then following those two items, they played a new robo show that I have not seen, which was the Battle one. This is one that Nick Weir premiered within the past year as part of a special demonstration in New York, and this thing was absolutely beautiful. It was the most tight and together robo show I've seen, pulling in some elements of the lighting in the venue, pulling in a little bit of the Vistaramas, but just overall the movement of the screens, the videos, everything's just so incredibly in sync. That one is insane to see. There's so much action to it. If you ever get a chance to see it, you must see that, because it is a completely different ball field than the Dance in a Box that we see so many times. And then following that, they played one more Vistarama. This one premiered with the Anthem of the Seas, but we did not see it last year. This was the Leonardo da Vinci one, which includes a combination of the robots and the Vistaramas to create a really neat effect and really take over the room. There's a neat scene in it where you're flying over some countryside and through parts of Italy, through Rome. If you've ever been to Epcot or Disney's California Adventure, if you've ever done soaring, it'll feel very similar to that. While you're not moving, the sheer size of the screen, similar to an IMAX movie, just makes it feel like you're flying over these things. So it is an incredible Vistarama to see. The first time I've seen that one, because it of course premiered with the Anthem of the Seas, and it was not a part of the 270 experience last year. And outside of that show, we unfortunately did not see any other robo shows or Vistaramas. But that was about the entirety of the event, of course. Since they could not do the aerialist, it was really feeling a little empty, but Chloe and Jack put on a lot of humor, brought a little extra energy to the room because it did not have that same level of energy that we saw last year because of the lack of the entertainers involved. But following that lasted about 45 minutes. We then went over to Music Hall for the very first night of our tribute band for this sailing. This time it is a Led Zeppelin tribute band called Led Zeppelin. They are absolutely incredible. Not a big Led Zeppelin fan, purely from age and demographic. Not too familiar with the music and didn't really know any of the songs performed, but just the sheer quality of the music, the emphasis on the actual instruments and the band. Some of the other acts that we've seen have, even in the rock area, been very vocal focused, and this one really put a lot of energy into the music, and that might be an element of Led Zeppelin, but it really made the show entertaining, even if you had no idea what any of these songs were in. Even if you didn't even really care about the songs, just the quality of the music as a whole was just so much energy and excitement to watch and be a part of that venue where this was going on. So that about wrapped up the night. That went 10:30 till midnight. It is now 1:40 in the morning, and in about 20 minutes, the last event of the day, we are heading towards Bermuda, which is pretty much straight out to sea, and as a result, we will be crossing time zones. So we are going to be setting the clocks forward by 1 hour at 2 a.m. in about 20 minutes from now. And I'm not positive, but I believe that is going to hold all the way through to the end of the sailing then. So that wrapped up today, and that really kind of wraps up this episode. There's not too much else to go into. Of course, tomorrow is our first day at sea. A lot of different events, starting off bright and early with the iFly, so be sure to tune in tomorrow for that, and we'll have our first interviews and really get into the Anthem of the Seas a bit more as the sailing starts to take off. So stay tuned for the links and be sure to come back tomorrow.